Hello, ladies and germs, and welcome to another scintillating episode of Never Stay Dead. I am beta co-host 2 Matt, along with the prestigious leader that we have here, the head of the pack.
Am I the alpha dog? You were the alpha dog last time. Such an intro.
Oh,
but then I decided we were both lone wolves. But anyway, I am Damian, and I am ready for some scintillation.
We're gonna be talking about the classic, the single greatest Green Arrow story ever, according to a few people I heard, though I disagree with that out of hand.
According to Micke Grell?
Yeah, according to Micke Grell. Micke Grell's Green Arrow, The Longbow Hunters, which is the kind of mini-series that led into his long run on the character.
Yes, but before we dive in, I'd like to shout out a few podcasts that I've been listening to a lot lately.
Brought to you by our sponsors.
They are not sponsors, but they're just people that I've really been enjoying the hard work they put into their podcasts.
Yeah.
The first one is the Daily Rios, and it's Peter Rios's podcast, and he's switched it up with this new format where he records 5 days a week, and then he puts it all together in one episode that comes out each week called the Daily Rios Digest. And I've found it a really lively, interesting thing to listen to each week. He usually covers comics and usually talks about other stuff, sometimes about things in his life, movies, TV, but comics always come back into the mix a lot. And it's just a fun, I look forward to it every week. So I wanted to shout that out.
That's great.
And another one I've been getting into, and for anyone who thinks some of our podcasts are overly long, a podcast called Into the Weird, which I think has been running quite a long while, as far as I know. But anyway, their average podcast seems to be about 2.5 hours long. And they go really in depth on issues of Bronze Age comics, usually horror comics or weird comics. And they continually come back to reading the Doctor Strange run, I think the one from Steve Englehart. So 2 recent shows I listened to, where one was about 2 issues of Doctor Strange by Steve Englehart and Gene Colan, and then another one was about their 2 favorite issues of What If, and that was really entertaining. So anyway, I highly recommend both those podcasts.
And I just find it so interesting you're talking about Rios, because he's been at it so long. He was going at it before I knew it was called a podcast. It's just like he's doing audio talks about comics, and I don't know.
Yeah, he was in a famous early comic book group podcast whose name eludes me at the moment. And then he kind of went solo on the Daily Rios. I think he might have done actual daily podcasts for a while, and then he kept the title even as he played around with his format.
Yeah, good on him.
So, as you were saying before I rudely interrupted, we're taking a look at The Longbow Hunters by Micke Grell, pretty much by himself.
Yeah.
Did he have a colorist, or did he even do the colors himself?
Julia, Laquement did colors.
There it is, Julia Laquement.
And there's a letter.
And he has an assistant, Lorene Haynes.
Right, though assistant in these days of comics might have meant more things we wouldn't think about now, like layering, pressing, just shuffling the pages to where they need to go.
You mean in Photoshop or something?
Yeah. Well, there would have been no Photoshop.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, an assistant could mean anything. It could be just someone who helped him around the office. It might have been someone who helped, ink in the backgrounds or something.
Yeah, my understanding was a lot of assistants at this time in comic offices were doing some of the just like the work of getting everything assembled to move to the next person in line, but not necessarily doing what you consider art duties or anything like that.
Well, okay. Well, it's probably not worth getting into. I was thinking an assistant in the studio, not an assistant at the DC offices.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So it's hard to, we don't know if this person, what kind of assistant this person was.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Yeah.
So, and you have read it before, right? And I have never read it.
Yeah, I read it a while ago, and I got the original Prestige issues. This was originally 3 Prestige-sized issues,
right?
And
square bound, I assume.
Mm-hmm. They're pretty easy to find. I've seen them go on sale in a bunch of cons and a bunch of places for relatively cheap. So this is easy to pick up. The trade's actually harder to find.
Oh, interesting. Huh. Well, I got it off of Comixology, so it is there.
Yeah, and that's how they have it there, is the trade version.
Right.
And I don't know, it's a beaut. It's from
by a lot of fans, it's considered a classic of 1980s comics, right? And apparently the first time Green Arrow actually had his own solo title.
There's a mini series before this.
Okay.
Like 4-issue mini, but nothing.
But other than that, I think he was a backup back in the Silver Age, and then maybe teamed up with Green Lantern in the Bronze Age.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, he was a different kind of character, I guess. I don't know a whole lot about his origins or what's earlier. I know there's a lot of people who do. I just don't know.
I know the general take on him when they created him is they just wanted another Batman-like character. Mm-hmm. So he was a millionaire who fought crime, and he had a sidekick named Speedy, and he had an Arrow car and all of that kind of stuff back in the early Silver Age, or perhaps even the Golden Age.
Used a lot of trick arrows and all that. Right. And they allude to a lot of that at the front of this book.
Right. And then I assume, because to my knowledge, it was when Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams wrote the Green Arrow, Green Lantern comic, or the Green Lantern, Green Arrow comic, that they turned him into kind of a, what's the right word? Not just a liberal, but kind of a certain kind of liberal, right? Very activist.
Yeah.
Critical of the establishment kind of guy, which made a lot of sense in 1969 or whenever, when they did that. And
yeah, I mean,
they used him as a contrast to Green Lantern, who was, the military background and more the straight arrow, so to speak.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that lives. I have yet to read that. I don't know how best to go about. I don't know, because every time I've looked for a collection or something, there didn't seem to be a affordable, easy collection. Yeah.
I have found like Baxter paper reprints of them pretty cheaply. Okay. Of those Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil. There must be trades of it out there.
I saw a couple of Nimbai, but they were
out of print,
pricey. Yeah, and out of print.
And then actually,
there you go. There's an issue of it.
No, this is different. This is Micke Grell with.
Oh right.
Sorry to tell you, no. But it's obviously confusing because at the time Micke Grell drew a lot like Neil Adams, and they revived after it went out of circulation for a while. They revived the Green Lantern, Green Arrow series, still written by Denny O'Neil, but now drawn by Micke Grell, who at the time was still deeply influenced by Neil Adams, who had a Neil Adams-like style. But they set most of their adventures in outer space, I guess, in contrast with the older series. Probably as we were, this was 1976. Okay, so we weren't in the Reagan era yet, but anyway, it was less socially relevant and more adventure in space. I confess I haven't reread any of it since the 70s, so I'm not sure.
Is this close to when Grell was doing Warlord?
Yeah, he may have been doing Warlord concurrently. I'm not sure when Warlord started. Well, I have here issue number 49 of Warlord, which is from 1981. So he may have done it.
It's close.
Started it around just after this. I'm not sure how long this Green Arrow, Green Lantern.
Well, also
ran.
In that time, like not everything's necessarily monthly, so it's even harder to.
That's true. I think this is published bi-monthly. The Green Arrow, this is the Green Lantern, Green Arrow one. But Micke Grell was a little bit of a star artist at the time, maybe because Neil Adams wasn't around. But he had sort of because I was reading fanzines at this period, and there were fans who were kind of obsessed with his whatchamacallit, his Legion of Superheroes run, and then he also became even more of a cult artist writer. He actually did his first doing his own writing, as far as I know, was on Warlord,
and that's pretty well remembered, is my understanding.
Yeah, and I think it ran for about 100 issues, which is a long time for a sword and sorcery, when all of other is the only successful, swords and sandals kind of story from DC.
Swords and sandals?
Well, that's another that before they used to say sword and sorcery, they said swords and sandals. But that included like historical movies with people fighting with swords and stuff.
Okay.
But this was definitely a fantasy. It kind of was a cross between Conan and Journey to the Center of the Earth or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it had its own flavor. I mean, I remember liking it a lot and feeling like it was different. And maybe it survived because it wasn't a Conan clone. So in my mind, he was kind of a star at DC, and then he left and did a bunch of indie work. I think most well remembered is his comic called Sable, which I don't have a copy of it in front of me. But before Sable, he did Star Slayer for Pacific Comics.
I have an issue of that somewhere.
And it's similar. It's like Warlord in space. And he didn't stick with it long. He let other people take it over. I think because he was more interested in Sable, which was a bit more down to earth kind of adventures of a non-superpowered kind of soldier of fortune, I think. It's been a really long time since I've read it. I've rebought those because I've been told they're really great. And
no collection of those, I imagine.
Gore Vidal. And I've been buying individual issues of that, and I've been meaning to try reading it.
Make the attempt. Yeah.
Well, I just buy too many comics, so I don't get around to reading.
The way you worded it was funny as all.
I have good intentions and large boxes full of comics.
I can't relate to that at.
So, anyway, so I think the Sable thing would be interesting if you were really into his Green Arrow run, his later Green Arrow one that they're about to talk about. That would be what led into Green Arrow, as far as I would understand.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I babbled on so long about it.
No, I mean, this is all great. And
but the irony is, so I really liked Micke Grell, and I stopped after Sable in my youth, and I never followed him back to DC. So I've never read any of his most famous work, his Green Arrow work.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the reason his Green Arrow work is the most famous is more because of how superheroes proliferated, and this is his big one attached to that, I guess.
Well, I think
his solo.
Would you say he was part of a wave of more with Green Arrow of more mature takes on superheroes?
Yes, I mean, this
came in right when everybody was starting to do. He was one of the better and earlier ones to do that, to take the more mature approach.
This is 87, so it's after the year after Dark Knight. And I mean, if you think about it, it's really only months apart.
And Watchmen might have just been wrapping up as this came out. So he might have been working on it before he saw Watchmen, or maybe he saw the first few issues of Watchmen while he was working on it.
Also, depending on how involved he was or cared about some upstart British guy.
Right. Well, I don't know anything about Micke Grell, whether he was the type to be following other artists or not at that point.
Or which ones he would. Although I'm sure Watchmen made enough.
There must have been a lot of talk about Alan Moore even before Watchmen came out. He was already like, I
mean, was it V that put him on the map?
Was it what?
V that put him on the map in a big way?
Well, V has a weird publishing history where part of it
Yes.
was published before Watchmen in England,
Mhm.
and then it was reprinted and completed in the United States. No, what put him on the map was Swamp Thing.
It was duh.
But
I knew that. I knew that.
inner circles, there was also all the stuff he was doing in England. Like the pros all knew about his work in England.
Yeah, I understand because my understanding of the printing history is that V was started so much earlier. I didn't know that it wasn't necessarily completed or whatever, and so I thought that was kind of what brought him up to maybe get him to Swamp Thing, I guess is what I had in my head or something.
Well, in a way, it might have, because his Miracle Man, I know now we're off on a tangent on Alan Moore,
whatever.
but it all connects, right? His Miracle Man and his V for Vendetta were appearing monthly in installments in a British comic that started in
Warriors?
1981, I think. Warrior, yeah.
Oh.
Warrior magazine.
I'm so close.
Yes.
I've never seen one, so
those two together, particularly because they're so different and both so, the superstars of the Warrior magazine, probably grabbed him a lot of attention.
Yeah. But so this was part of that, what do you say, bronze, dark and gritty reboot era.
Right.
But
or is it the Copper era at this point? I'm always confused about the Copper Age and when that is and what that's about. But I think I think the Copper Age is when people use that term, the period between the more innocent Bronze Age and leading into that dark and gritty age.
So what's 1990 called?
I think that's where the dark and even though
I'm thinking like X-Men 1 post, like that's definitely different.
Yeah, I don't really. No one has one single term for beyond. It's kind of sad in a way because it's fun to categorize things, but there doesn't seem to be a strong term.
I feel like it should be called the Foil Age.
The Foil Age, right?
Yeah, it fits. It stopped. I don't know.
Yeah. I did notice that the Green Arrow Longbow Hunters does not have the Comics Code Authority on it, which would have been quite unusual in 1987.
The things that were said in this comic, I was like, oh, wow, you could not publish this today, even though those are the villains.
Yeah. No, so it was pushing the edge at the time.
Yes.
And DC must have been reading the waters because they were releasing a bunch of stuff without the Comics Code Authority, even though they were the last ones to stop using the Comics Code Authority like around 2000 or something.
Yeah, them and Marvel, I think it was.
I think Marvel stopped sooner than them in terms of actually putting it on the cover.
I thought it was like within months of each other.
Oh, I thought there was years. Well, anyway, that's not important.
Okay. Well,
but I'm pretty sure your average comic still had the Comics Code Authority on it in 1987.
Marvel gave it up around like 2001, I thought.
Okay. Well, then maybe they both stopped around the same time.
Because it happened around when they were doing E for Evolution with New X-Men, I remember. Anyways.
Does your original copies have like a mature reader's warning on it or anything like that?
Oh, of Green Arrow?
Green Arrow Longbow Hunters?
Yeah, the covers somewhere had like suggested for mature readers in relatively small font, but it was
because the digital trade has no such warning.
No.
Probably in the Comixology description, it may have something.
Which is funny to me because that prestige issue thing to me like felt more like, oh, this is a mature thing. Whereas this just feels like another Green Arrow trade, and it's maybe more warranted.
There's no warning at all or anything, and people don't care anymore.
Though I feel like you open to the first real page of the comic because there's a lot of intro matter and they threw in some design stuff that does not fit the feel of this book at all.
Do you mean this double?
If you go back a page.
Oh, is that a real part of the comic there?
No, I mean, this was added for the trade. I'm saying it's this like graphic design thing that doesn't fit the feel of this comic.
Oh, true. It makes it look kind of light and breezy.
Yeah.
For people on the podcast, we're looking at a screen of my Comixology version, and there's just a very simple graphic of a arrowhead, green
it's like
on
a
green
diamond.
And then on the first actual page, you're plunged in kind of the I don't know, the kind of seedy, prostitution-y kind of side of Seattle.
Well, that and Grell's art is, I don't know how it compares to his other work, as I haven't read any of it.
Right.
But I mean, compared to even other comics of the age, even like Dark Knight Returns, which this is very much in that vein, right? Like I mean, this is a reboot of the character in a way, or a new direction, however you want to look at it. This art is this feels like an artist's art I don't know. He's using a lot of colored pencils. You can see a lot of the lines, but it's very well rendered from an artistic perspective. There's only a few frames where I saw the art looked less than stellar.
I'm thinking, as we're looking at individual pages, but maybe for the sake of the podcast, we should give a quick overview of the plot before we plunge into details. A general sense of what we're talking about.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you want me to do it, or would you like to do it?
I love your summaries because I'm bad at it.
Okay, well, at a very broad level, this is a story about Diana Black Canary and Oliver Queen Green Arrow. They've either moved to, or they're just visiting Seattle but thinking about moving there, and they seem to be in a new phase of their lives or something, and they're very intensely entwined as lovers, but Diana does not want to have children, and she's going off to do her own investigation case, and Oliver the Green Arrow gets sucked into kind of a series of mysterious murders of someone using arrows. And that slowly his investigation and his dealings with the police slowly uncovers and opens up like an onion a sort of conspiracy that goes back to World War II, and also involves at least one vet. There's some aspects that were unclear to me on my first read of this, but involves some Vietnam vets, I think, or at least one Vietnam vet who's used as an assassin by these people from World War II. And they are tied in with some people. They end up being tied in some way with the investigation that Diana Black Canary is doing. And she gets captured and tortured, which leads Green Arrow to start killing people. And eventually we learn this all dates back to this group of, what's the name of the organization that eventually became the CIA but wasn't during World War II, sort of rogue agents who were discover that one of the people in the Japanese camps, that we had during World War II, was involved with the Yakuza and somehow was supposed to have $2 million. And eventually they torture him and his family and get the $2 million away from him, and then set themselves up as sort of half legitimate businessmen and half criminal cocaine smuggling stuff. It's kind of complicated. So, but basically so all this kind of layers of conspiracy is uncovered. And then the other big thread is there's someone that I think the child of the person who was tortured to get that $2 million is taken to Japan and trained as a bow woman, an archer, trained her whole life to take revenge, to get her honor back, and to kill these people who stole the money from the Yakuza. And I know from reading like New 52 Green Arrow, she continued to be a character. Her name is Shadow. And so I assume we learn a lot more about her in future story arcs. But she's a mysterious and kind of compelling character. To some extent, maybe there's cliches about the way the Japanese and honor and all of that work. Who knows? because I
And
don't know enough about such things.
erotic mysticism and the like yeah, there's a lot of
Right.
there's a lot of stuff that people would point to and be like, "That's bad now." And I'm not saying
Right.
they're wrong, but this is done at a level where I don't know, the overall story is still strong, but there's a lot of elements going on here. Though with all that plot that you're talking about, and as complex as this comic gets, I feel like the plot takes a backseat to the motifs and the themes, which is not great necessarily, but it's how it's presented. And so
So
this
what do you
first
see as some of the motifs or some of the themes?
well, I mean, first there's something to the location and that this is Seattle, not Arrow or Star City.
Right, right. And there's a whole sense when you read it that he is like a vigilante in our real world, except that people put up with him, whereas I think he would a guy walking around with a bow and arrow might immediately get arrested.
There's a lot of apprehension to him, but another big thing in the first 2 pages is they're talking about hunting and being a hunter, and he is one of the hunters in the story, and they're recognizing this element to it, which gets to the killing that you're talking about later. And he's talking about how he'd hunt and how the crimes that he used to deal with were so goofy and how things are so much more serious and gritty now. Like
Right.
they address that at the front of this comic to make the transition as they move through. It's really ham-fisted, actually.
Yeah, and the relationship with Diana. Wait, is it
Mhm.
Dinah or Diana? Dinah.
Dinah.
The relationship with Dinah Black Canary is very, I don't know. It feels a little on the nose or something. Does that make sense? Or
How do you mean? Because I mean, they're in a relationship, so I don't know what you mean by it being on the nose.
well, like the way they talk to each other is almost too direct, and
Yeah, and like
it doesn't feel like people who've been in a relationship a long time, although that's what they're supposed to be.
right.
A little Hallmark card, not Hallmark card, but I don't know, just sort of by the numbers to a degree.
Well, they talk to each other in like this sequence that we're looking at where Oliver is recounting his history, or maybe it's a few pages later. He's recounting his history, and it's essentially to catch up new readers with who the heck is the Green Arrow, what's going on, what's the legacy. Like they kind of have a little synopsis, and they talk about the island a little bit and how he became the
Right.
Green Arrow, but they weave in the hunting thing again and a couple other things that are come up later. But it's there, and he's talking to her is the framing, and then you realize she left because she's heard this, she knows this all.
Right.
And they also talk about the connection to Robin Hood, and there's that
Right.
painting, like you said,
The
very
house he's living in and looks like a castle a little bit, like a mini castle.
well, and they call it Sherwood Castle.
Oh, did they? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I apologize to the people listening to the podcast that I didn't give it 2 reads because I was, as I was working my way through it, I was looking, since there is a lot here, I was sort of trying to figure out certain aspects, and maybe I missed other aspects of the story.
Well, and it's very easy to do for a number of reasons. Another thing I didn't like in this book is Grell has a number of confusing layouts where he'll have a 2-page spread, and you're supposed to read across the top it, and then the bottom, like the 2 pages are split, or there'd be other elements like that where the layouts were unlike other
Right.
like any other I had run across, and I had to reread the 2 pages to understand what was happening because I lost track, which
Right.
at this point I've seen so many layouts that I've heard people complain about. I'm like, oh no, your eye goes here. Da, da, da. Like I have it down. And if Grell's throwing me a curveball at this point and I can't follow it, I can't imagine anyone else's either. Like he did not do his layouts properly from time to time.
I agree. And later in the book, I had to do some real double takes. I mean, it's way near the end of the book, but there was a scene with 2 helicopters, and I lost track of who was in which helicopter and what was going on. And that was actually very important. And then later I saw, oh, this guy's back at his office. So he must have been in the other helicopter that didn't get blown up and that kind of thing. And there were also scenes with arrows being shot where Grell sort of...
Right, because you have multiple archers, and so knowing what arrow's going where is important.
Right. And you had to like notice, it was kind of clever. Like there was a scene where you had to notice that one archer had shot the string of the bow of the other archer, so they couldn't shoot it anymore.
Yeah, I remember that one.
I had to do kind of a double take to figure out what had happened.
I had to look that page over 5 times before I could figure out what happened. I was, yeah. There's that, and there's also with the complex plot you explained earlier very well. There are a lot of transition points that I could not follow. Like when we move from, because when we initially meet Shadow in book 2, she's trying to kill Oliver. And then in book 3, they're like apprehensively working together. And by the end of the book, they're killing people together. And I was trying to track the relationship and I didn't understand how things moved because there's like an implication in a caption that was reiterating the entire like metamorphosis of their relationship. And frankly, there are moments in this story that are poorly done. Like the narrative is not poorly there. I think Micke Grell being on this solo meant that he had a lot more control. And I feel like this is a time where I wish an editorial person would come and say, no, you have to establish these things more clearly, because
it might be that Micke Grell coming back from indie comics kind of was in a position of saying, I'm not going to be edited heavily or something.
Which is
guessing.
Hilarious again for the comparison of the time, because this is when like Frank Miller was doing all of his strongest work, but he was also receiving a stronger editorial hand because he wasn't Frank Miller yet. And
in 1987, well, like when he did Dark Knight Returns, was he not? I mean, I know
he
nothing
just finished Dark Knight Returns, right?
Right. I know nothing about like that creation.
I mean,
but it does seem like compared to Miller and Alan Moore, he just, and maybe it's because of editorial or something else, but there are just moments where you wish an editor had said, you know, back up here and let's make this more clear. Like, even though both Miller and Moore had very complex plots, you didn't lose track the way you do sometimes here.
And these are the things I dislike the most about the book. But there's so much Grell does here. I mean, that plot is very complex and it plays through. There's some hinge points that don't work great, but I mean, what a story. And then I was just going to say, like, just in the art, there's a number of landscapes in here that I feel like if you pulled out and just blew up are the sorts of things I'd see in an art gallery alone. And they're just panels in this book.
Right. And it in the context of most comic books of the time and what comic book readers are coming out of, this is kind of a radical approach to a superhero book because it's done in this more, in terms of flashiness, it's very low key, right? It's more like someone drew a very sensitive artistic sketch of a rainy day or something, but then there happens to be a realistically shaped human being in it who's a superhero with arrows. You know, there's not huge muscles, there's not fists coming out at you into your face and all of those kinds of superhero cliches that you would have expected to see.
I feel like if this had come out a few years later, it would have been under the Vertigo imprint. Like,
yeah, right.
There's that, but also the artistry in this book is just unlike any other book I've seen. It's really something to look at. and it takes a while to drink in the pages and kind of appreciate all the details, but there's a lot of detail on display, and in a way that I don't know, like there's a lot of backgrounds that fade away, a lot of kind of shades and whatnot, but I mean the figures, the expressions, the action usually is there, and there's a few misses, but by and large what's on display is something special.
Yeah. And there are moments of mixed media where he clearly drew on a different kind of paper, maybe some paper that has a special texture or something, and then glued it down onto the page. I'm surprised that he was not doing the coloring, because the colors feel like they were drawn on the page at the same time as it was penciled.
I think there's some Bristol board. And,
yeah, that's some kind of special board. I don't know if, Bristol board might be the name. But like here, the one we're looking at right here, there's these panels in color, and then there's this kind of artistic sketch that looks, very grainy, or has texture of the paper in the pencils.
Well, and the colorists doing colored pencils and just leaving it with the color pencils basically is not something I've seen before.
Yeah. I can't figure out if it was all done in pencil or just some panels are in pencil. Some panels are clearly done just in pencil without the ink on top of it.
Yes.
And others are done with a very fine line that could be enhanced pencils, or it might have been done inking, but with a very narrow quill with lots of little lines or something.
See, I swear it's like a thicker pencil line or something, like an HB, what would that be, 3 or something? Like it's a heavy pencil, but I don't think because I mean, do they even credit an inker?
They don't, but Grell might have done his
own
inking. He certainly did in a lot of other. I mean, when I look at this page that we're looking at the moment, half the panels are in a completely different style than the others. It feels, I'm guessing there was some ink and some pencil all over the place, and then some of these panels that are kind of flashbacks. This also was a scene that I didn't understand that well. I think this is a flashback to the same people in the conspiracy when they were younger, and they maybe hired this Vietnam vet as an assassin, and he's also killed a woman in bed. And I don't know if that's what.
Yeah, there's a lot of implication. I think this comic is really asking you to slow down compared to a number of other comics that are using words and art to convey things almost doubly. This goes a very different direction, and I think it sings in certain moments and fails in moments that we spoke about earlier. I do really like the inclusion of shadow and how they artistically display a lot of that. It's a lot of heavy blacks, and what really took me was the archery details. I mean, Shadow's bow and arrows and quiver are all different from Oliver's because they're from different traditions. Like this was very meticulously researched.
And they talk about what the materials her bow and her arrows are made of.
Right. And you can see the difference of materials. It's
right. A lot of care has been put into those details and a lot of other details.
Right.
It's funny though, there's times where his art also looks clumsy, like beautiful but clumsy. Like he's not maybe not a natural, although he's probably done tons of action. So maybe he's purposefully just toning down the action here.
I don't know. I know there's a scene, I believe we're looking now at the second of 3 chapters of this. And there's a scene in a police chief's office where his head and hand are completely out of perspective with each other, and it is the worst panel of this entire work.
Yeah.
And possibly Grell's career. I don't know. It's really bad.
Must be somewhere around here. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, there's moments where it just gets awkward, but I think, he's willing to have some imperfect drawings and then move on from them. I did think his relationship with the police was really interesting, and I have to confess that so as I was reading this, at times it felt kind of slow, and I didn't see where it was going, and I felt almost bored. But by the time I got to the end of the book, I was like, wow, this is a really cool thing now that I know everything that has happened. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes,
yeah.
And I think in the long run, that's better, because sometimes I love a book throughout the journey, and then I get to the end and it's like, oh, that kind of made the whole book seem less good. So it's great that this has an ending that reflects back on the whole book as being, oh, this was all very cleverly put together. And that launched me into starting to read the next volume.
Okay.
And I've only read like 2.5 issues. Okay. And I assume you've read a lot, but
I've read none of it.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. But I thought on reading it that it's the next volume is Green Arrow #1, and the trade volume is called Hunter's Moon. I feel like he's playing with a lot of the same themes. He's not drawing it anymore, though. But I think his writing gets even better. So it almost felt like, in hindsight, that the Longbow Hunters was just Micke Grell warming up to his subject, and now he's got even more to say, and perhaps is going to structure it even better.
I'm curious to know if some of the dicier moments in dialogue carry through.
That's a good question, because it may have been more general audience at that point.
What's funny too is that we're looking at some of this volume 1 of Grell's run with, who is it? Ed. I didn't get to read it.
Ed Hannigan is the artist, and it's inked by Dick Giordano.
And I know a number of artists met this, but this looks like stock standard Vertigo art to me. Like,
yes.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's a good reason for that, if those talents carried on to other Vertigo books, but it just looks like that kind of a book.
Well, I think Ed Hannigan was, as far as I remember, a kind of workman-like person who was not like a superstar talent, but he could tell a comic book story. And then they put Dick Giordano on it, who, I don't know if he still was the editor-in-chief at this time, but was a big star at DC Comics. So they put a top inker on top of a workman-like artist, I think. But anyway, it's more of a standard-looking comic, but it continues these themes about a certain angle on street crime, and sort of linking street crime to more complex issues, and getting involved in a lot of moral gray area, because the story is mostly about someone who was in prison for torturing little girls. And he's now out of prison because he's going to get a new trial. And so the cops in Green Arrow think he's guilty, but is he really guilty? He's kind of a dick. So anyway, it's intriguing. I'm assuming he will end up not being the actual killer, but or perhaps there are two, and there'll be some kind of surprise, I'm thinking. But
gotcha. I mean,
but I'm just guessing.
No idea.
So anyway, I think by getting to the end of this, the Longbow Hunters, I just got it. It leaves me very excited for more Micke Grell.
There it is.
Oh, the bad picture.
That head to that hand is just
yes. Yeah, you
not
can't
good.
do that. Your elbow has to go somewhere.
And the female cop is checking out Oliver a lot, which is just weird. I don't know. It was a weird
particularly
inclusion.
because he doesn't look that studly to me.
Right.
He's just more an average looking guy, although kind of creepy because of the way he's dressed. I do like the redesign of Green Arrow, also moving him away from a standard skin tight outfit and
into this archer's hooded kind of thing. He's still all green, but
and if you took away his green mask, he just would be like some some creepy guy who goes around the city dressed as an archer.
And what I can't understand, though I do understand, is his bow is like it's just like a wooden longbow. It's there's nothing to it. Later iterations of Green Arrow, and it's funny because he goes back from like compound to just a longbow to I've seen him use a short bow in one issue, and that was weird. But this bow looks like what you'd hand a beginner. It looks like it doesn't look like it's arced enough or curved enough to have more than like 40 pounds of weight behind it. It's just kind of goofy that he's walking around with this thing and all the things that happen when I'm like, that looks a little unsturdy. Like I have a compound bow downstairs that's
so you know more. So he did some research, but then he maybe fell down on actually drawing the bow.
Well, it's funny because his research is actually based in a way that fits Green Arrow very well, which is very Hollywood based. There's actually a lot of archery research that came in the early 2000s where they actually found out a lot of medieval archers actually didn't do it the way you see in the movies. They actually knocked their bow on the other side. They didn't use a quiver, and they'd hold extra arrows in their hand. But that's
very
not
inefficient sounding.
Well, comparatively to the quiver, where things would always fall out and not really work, it wasn't that. Okay. And I mean, but this is the tradition. What was understood, and so much of Green Arrow is actually based on Robin Hood interpretation,
like movies of Robin Hood or something.
Movies and or storybooks with potential pictures, and a lot of that. And Shadow is drawn very much in the Asian archery tradition with there's small details in everything. Like, oh, this is great. If you go back one.
Okay, I just liked that picture of them both shooting.
It's a beautiful page, but there's that one panel at the bottom with the two bows. You can see the different details. You can see the difference of the wood types, because like Oliver has a very like oak looking, just like curved, just one flat curve,
right?
Where Shadow has this lighter wood, and it's knocked with whatever it is, and it's not just one curve, but it's kind of a curve and then flattens out to the other way, which actually creates more pressure as you pull back, and it's actually longer.
Right, and it looks like it's made of more than one kind of wood, maybe.
Yes.
The other thing I just noticed, because you're talking about quivers, she doesn't have a quiver. She has something else that she holds her arrows in.
It is a quiver. It's a quiver of a different design that's more Asian, where they just knock in this little like wooden pallet.
It's like
and there's a sling.
Right. It's like it's in a piece of wood or something so that it won't fall out. Whereas we just see him climbing up a ladder. It looks like you would actually have your arrows falling out of your quiver in that position he's in the middle of the page.
I mean, he would, but it's not going to happen in a Green Arrow comic, understand?
Right. But now that you point that out, I hadn't thought about it before. But
what's also interesting is No trick arrows or anything, but his
Right.
little quiver has more arrows than hers. But he's
That's
going to
true.
lose pretty much all the fights.
Right. So one of the cool aspects is we don't make out Green Arrow to be the absolute best. It's not the superhero cliche where our hero, he is older and maybe has not practiced archery as much as she has, but also
No.
because he's older, his many of his reactions just aren't as good.
Well, and he didn't start till he was what, 20 something?
Yeah.
And she started when she was barely old enough to pick up a bow.
Right. But in most comics, he's insanely naturally gifted, right?
Well, and there's one detail in Kevin Smith's when after Grell's done,
I've never read the Kevin Smith either.
There's one detail that I always thought was hilarious the way Kevin Smith wrote it. He's like, there's a poundage where people start, 40, 30, and there's a poundage where people get more advanced. And then the pros will use this poundage. And then the Olympians use this poundage. And then guys trying to impress their girlfriends use this poundage. But I use this poundage. And it's just like a scale
Off the
above
chart.
all that. Yeah. And it's just like, what?
Right. More significant would really, rather than Olympics and things, what poundage does someone who's hunting with an arrow use?
Well, and that's the thing is you'd be using I said I don't have a compound bow. I have a straight, I cannot think of the word. But if you're hunting, you are probably using a compound bow, which means you're on like an exponential amount of poundage over a non-compound bow, just because of the mechanics of it all make it a lot more that. But the poundage in Kevin Smith's is to that level from a straight bow. Which is hilarious, because if he was actually pulling that and shooting that the way that they show it, his arrow would kill and or explode someone on impact. I worked out some of the physics of it. I was like, he's shooting faster than a 45, which is funny because there's something in Secret Wars with Hawkeye that's a very big moment where one of the Thor villains, one of the constructors, he's the guy with the chain. I can't remember.
Oh, the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah,
I know who you mean. The guy with the chain. What's his name? Anyway,
yeah.
one of
He's
the
saying
members
like,
of the Wrecking Crew.
my armor can stop a bullet, and Hawkeye's like, at this range, this arrow is going to do more damage than a bullet, which for a good archer made a lot of sense. Like, this was a really weirdly researched detail that was just in the middle of Secret Wars, and the Wrecking Crew guy's like, oh, I can take it. And Hawkeye just lets one arrow go, and it's just in this guy's abdomen. It's nothing fatal or anything, but it penetrates his armor, and the guy freaks out. And it's one of my favorite details in comics. Just a different archery moment. But yeah. But coming back to this, there's a lot of beautiful archery fighting in here. And what's really cool too, as opposed to a lot of superhero comics, the fights are very fast. Like a couple blows and Oliver's laid out.
Or there's scenes like this where it's mental, right? They're just looking at each other, trying to decide who's going to do what.
Yeah, it's a little Dragon Ball Z, but yeah.
Well, I really liked a lot that he is a middle-aged guy and everything. And I know that for certain people who raved about Green Arrow, that was an important aspect of him, and they were really upset in New 52 where they made him young again.
Yes.
And I can see that now that I've read this. I mean, it's part of the flavor of it.
There's a lot about aging in this book that I thought was really interesting. So, I mean, there's this in this fight, he gets laid out and he says, I'm 43, I'm getting older, and I'm getting slower.
Right.
Which also goes to Diana talking about, because earlier, Oliver and her are having sexy times.
Yes.
And he says he wants to have children, and she says she won't. And Oliver says, "But you love kids." And she says, "That's why I won't, because I won't be raising orphans." Because she's pointing to the danger of their job and saying, like, "That's part of the thrill, but we don't know if we're ever coming back when we go
Yeah.
out. And you can't ask me to give this up as I wouldn't ask that of you." And it was this very kind of real vigilante moment that we don't get often. But her saying, like, "One of these nights we're going to go out and one of us is going to die."
Yeah.
And to the name of our show, like, none of the main characters really die in this book, but the idea of morality is so much more.
Mortality, you mean?
What did I say?
Morality.
Yeah, mortality. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I just want to be
No,
clear on that since it's an important
thank
word
you.
here.
No, it's very important. It's so much more felt in this book, and the danger and the moments where they get hit feel so much more impactful because that idea of what's tense is there, as opposed to reading, I don't know, X-Men now, where
Mhm.
characters are being killed every issue and it doesn't mean a damn thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and when the Black Canary is captured and tortured,
Mhm.
that is extremely impactful, unlike in your average comic.
Well, and there's implications of sexual abuse
Well,
too.
yes, but it's funny because either in this comic or in the follow-up that I read the first 2 issues of, they emphasize she was not raped, but that it's still maybe that was because you're right. Maybe the continuing series was back to being child friendly or something. But
Not necessarily child friendly, but maybe, you know,
toned down.
yeah, more palatable for your average audience than this is I don't know how to put it. Like, I've read edgier comics, I guess, but I mean, there's something brutal and visceral about this comic that
Right.
I don't think I've read many that hit that. And there's also a lot of racial slurs and things, and treatment of women
Mhm.
overall is not great in
Right.
this book. Um,
There's also a vibe to me that I associate with movies in the 70s of like Death Wish and stuff like
okay.
that. That the world is full of these brutal criminals on the street level,
Mhm.
and there's a certain kind of paranoia about crime being everywhere, and
Yes.
it just reminds me of that, and I thought of that. I don't know why I kept thinking of that, but that this is the kind of book when you read the books, too many books like this, because it's more like real life rather than Batman and the Joker or whatever.
Mhm.
You start feeling more distrustful of your fellow human being, people on the street, or it feels like crime is just around the corner.
Yes.
Too much of this might make you want to buy a gun and put it under your pillow or something.
Which was interesting in the intro of this. God, who wrote the intro?
Mike Gold wrote the intro, which I have not read, at least
Yeah,
of my version.
Michael talks about Grell like fishing out things and pulling some things out of his couch, and one of them's a gun. And like there's a sense of a different time going on there. But I have a feeling Grell would be perceived differently in today's world.
Right. Well, and who knows where Grell has gone politically at this point.
Didn't he pass?
No, he's still alive. I've
Oh,
heard him
okay.
interviewed on podcasts. I think he's
How bad?
he's one of those people, who's no longer in the mainstream of comics, but he's kickstarting things like new or like things having to do with Sable, things
Okay.
that he owns. He's kickstarting. I've heard, but
Okay.
this
So
is
he's
a
at
very
home.
political book. On
Yeah.
one hand, it has this kind of the fear of crime, which may or may not be associated with a conservative point of view, but it also has it deals in the Iran Contra kind of stuff, which was a huge deal in the mid 80s, right, with Ronald Reagan and what was the name of that, Colonel North, Oliver North. And so this is very topical. And people might go back and read this and not think about politics in this way, but it's an extreme, at the time, it would have been an extremely strong political statement against American intervention and American willingness of certain American political entities to do all kinds of underhanded, illegal things to support anti-communist groups around the world.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I don't know. The vibe I also got was, especially here, we're looking at a page after we see Dinah abused, where
right.
Oliver goes the other way and kills her abuser, and effectively
Right.
flips a switch and becomes the hunter. And
right. I mean, I think Mike Grell is
vibe,
sort of, some criminals just deserve to die.
Which, given the setup, it's hard to argue.
Right. But so this kind of point of view can go either way, can evolve into, let's be tough on crime. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to be kind of brutal with criminals because criminals are bad guys, which, as we see nowadays, can sweep up all kinds of innocent people who are mistaken for criminals for one reason or another into a violent situation.
Well, and I don't know how the police chief was supposed to be portrayed, because there's a very direct conversation about the fact that the guy who was abusing Diana is the guy who was going around and killing the prostitutes. And
you know what? I missed that.
The police chief says...
I was so busy trying to follow other plot elements, I missed that he was the guy. Like, I almost forgot about early scenes in the book of people killing prostitutes.
Well, because it's so disconnected, frankly, it almost doesn't matter. But the police chief has this bit where he says, like, this guy is a problem and he's killing people, but he's killing prostitutes. And with the AIDS crisis going on, that's not necessarily such a bad thing, which is...
That's
Reagan's
a weird
take.
Way to look at it. Yes. Well, what he's saying is prostitution has gone down. I think he was saying prostitutes are afraid to go out and ply their trade, and so there's less AIDS. But
I think he was saying prostitutes are getting killed, so there's less prostitutes to spread AIDS. Either way,
I didn't read it that way, but either way, it's a very uncomfortable point of view.
Right, and I don't know if the police chief is supposed to be a bad guy or a good guy in this comic. Like,
right.
He's in it so rarely that, like, I don't know. And so what the politics you're supposed to take away from this book, I'm unsure of. And maybe that's intentional.
But he's there's all kinds of uneasy things on that side of things. But on the other side, it's very clear that members of the American government or military are working with these serial killers, cocaine dealers, and the rest to any way they can to smuggle money to the Contras to fight in Nicaragua, which is exactly what happened, not to my knowledge with serial killers, but I mean smuggling things to the Contras from funds in Iran. I mean, it's very specifically mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, but I did feel kind of, so, I mean, on one point, my one point is people look at current comics and because there's certain, I don't know, sexual politics in it, they somehow think that there was never politics in comics before. But this is just one very clear example of this. At the core of the crime in this comic, it's the underhanded political machinations of the U.S. government.
You leave me with no choice but to quote Seinfeld. Who are these people?
They're people, I mean, they're people doing what Ronald Reagan wanted them to do without without trying not to leave a trail that Ronald Reagan could be blamed, or his other top officials.
Right. I don't know. The people who say there weren't politics in comics tend to be people who don't know how to read.
Right. But as I said, on the other hand, it does also seem to partake of this sort of paranoia and viewing crime in a certain way that allows you to be very brutal with criminals. Yes, he killed someone who's a killer and a torturer, and I don't really feel bad about that. But the angle on it is that these people are all around us, and so it allows you to change your philosophy on how you treat criminals in general, perhaps. There's also a very odd scene early in the book where he shoots arrows at these thugs, including 3 arrows into a guy's earlobe, which seemed impossible to me. But a certain freeness with brutalizing criminals seeps in here and there.
Yeah, I mean,
as if every mugger is, I don't know. I mean, comics have always had this weird thing, because even very liberal comics writers in the 70s always started comics with some group of thugs threatening people. Like this idea that everywhere you go, there's these thugs that are going to try and kill you for your wallet or something. Which is, I don't think, how most crime actually happens.
No. I do think it's interesting because you're talking about the brutality. I feel a lot of that is the detail in the art, though, because this idea of, like, you know, piercing a guy's earlobe with arrows, or some of the other shots he does to, you know, take some muggers down and whatnot, as opposed to the violence wrap up that happens later, is interesting. Because if you think about any standard fare, the superheroes are usually breaking a limb or doing some
it's
decent
not
damage, but it's never it's
mortal.
never
explicit that limbs are broken,
right?
Well, it's certainly not in comics in the 70s and 80s,
right?
I wonder if I can find that scene, but anyway.
And so I'm curious what you thought about Dinah throughout this book, because she's handled.
Well, the one strange thing, I mean, she's off on her own solving a case, but then she does need to be rescued. So there is, even though she's her own woman, but she also does end up being the person, you know, the violence against her body, whatever it is that actually happened, is the motivating force for the change in his sort of moral compass and how he fights crime.
Well, and also this moment in here is why for a good while she can't use her sonic scream.
Okay.
Which isn't actually,
we don't ever see her use her sonic scream at all in this book.
No.
Before or after.
Right. But it's later used to explain that she can't do that. And it doesn't come back until after Grell is done with the character. I don't know if there's any other book at the time that, like, pulled her out and had her use it, though, or something like that. But
yeah, so I mean, I guess I found the page where he starts shooting at the muggers, and of course one of them has they all look like punk rockers or something. And he shoots one through the hand, one through the ear, another one, I don't...
right under the crotch.
Right under the crotch, or it could possibly actually be grazing the crotch area. And then all these, has more than 3 arrows. That's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 arrows to the guy's ear. Anyway, they're portrayed as completely willing to kill people just to get their wallet. But and I'm sure that happens every now and then, but it's not the kind of crime that I actually hear about in day-to-day life. And it is a cliche of comics, but it just feels different in the context of this story.
What's also really funny is that initial crime, the woman under attack looks like April O'Neil from Ninja Turtles lore with the
Oh, I
yellow
didn't notice
jacket and
that.
the hair, and a
I
couple
thought
of
it
the
was an old
punkers.
lady.
If you go to the first page, oh, maybe this is the second one. Sorry,
Oh, there
there's
may
a
be
couple that
another
happen.
mugging in the first page of the comic
Yeah.
but that Green Arrow's not does not stop that, right? The person gets killed.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Sorry, I mixed up a few pages there.
This one here, does she look like
Yeah.
April O'Neil? Yeah.
But then also a couple of the punks here early on look like Bebop and Rocksteady from the Turtles as well, which is just very weird. And there's a character later juxtaposed against a page with a spider that's Mr. Osborn. And you can't help but think of
Right.
Spider-Man. There's
Right.
just a few weird moments here. I'm like, why are we?
Right. Yeah. So with the treatment of the muggers, I don't know if it's just partaking of the cliches of comics or if we're getting kind of a message from Micke Grell that, criminals are in real life need very rough treatment because they are all vicious killers.
Well, he's ramping up the hunter idea and that Green Arrow is hunting them, but he's doing so without actually taking them out or doing them super serious harm. But as we go through the comic, it ramps up and it ramps up, and then it kind of hits a point at the end of the second book where he kills, and throughout the third book, because he's killed, his ability to kill again is there, and
Right.
like it's a different vibe, and that's supposed to set him to where I believe we go into the series, and that he's a superhero willing to kill because it's these very mortal consequences.
Right.
He's not Batman. He's a guy with a bow and arrow.
But the weirdest part that really disturbed me, and I think it was very on purpose by Micke Grell to make everything morally gray, is he kills a bunch of people, mostly kind of flunkies of the evil guy. And then he comes face to face with the government guy who says, who's pouring all the cocaine down a ravine. And he says, oh, well, there's no evidence against me. And I'll just do this again. We'll find another way to smuggle money. And not Micke Grell, Oliver Queen does nothing to him. But in a way, I mean, this guy does not commit the violent acts himself, but he is entangling the U.S. government with all these killers and rapists and serial killers. He just walks away scot-free, and he hands Green Arrow $200,000 in laundered money. And like, I just felt the superhero guy in me felt he should have found some way to pin it on this guy or do something to this guy or make it so this guy can't do this again. But he, who's really the most evil in a way because of his morality play, just walks away scot-free and in a sense bribes Green Arrow. So that was very troubling. And I think that's clever of Micke Grell, but also I'm very uncomfortable with that aspect of it.
It's an interesting position because that character has everything you say, but he's not pointing a gun at anyone. And so I think that's why he escapes, because they're only killing people that are putting them in mortal danger.
Right.
And then...
But he's clearly... I mean, he's pouring the cocaine away right in front of Green Arrow. He's clearly the original source of many of these problems that Green Arrow's been fighting.
Right, but he's also not the head kahuna, who's the person we see in the next few pages that gets dealt with.
Well, the person you're calling the head kahuna is one of the criminals that the U.S. government is getting in bed with, so that they can, or these representatives of the U.S. government who are illegally doing this stuff. So in a way, this this guy, the head of all the evil company that's smuggling cocaine and killing people, it's like he's like the head of the mob, right? But so you kill the head of the mob, but you don't kill the government people who've been working with the head of the mob and allowing them to do what they do. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know what Mike Grell intended there, but it plays in a number of ways, and that money comes back up in the Hunter Moon comic issues that I read.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's weird too that Oliver takes that money and is at the end says to Dinah, like, hey, we got a raise, basically.
Right.
Like, we're taking the money. Which
I got a hell of a raise today.
What?
And shouldn't he be upset that the government guy got away with it and there's no evidence?
I feel like, again, this is one of those transition points that I feel is like weakly written, but because there's a few implications when that guy's talking. He's taking away the evidence, and then he says the Rangers are going to be up there faster than you can say Smokey Bear, which I think is implying that if Oliver does anything to him, there's not going to be any evidence, and there's going to be people there with consequences, which also, given the nature of all the killings and they haven't been dealt with fully yet, would mean that the Robin Hood killer who's been throughout here and not dealt with yet would then be pinned on Green Arrow.
Right. And he's saying, you won't want to testify in court, implying, well, you're now a killer, so you can't go in court and testify.
Well, it's actually interesting because part of it's also there playing on the fact that he's a superhero and he can't do anything in these more real world circumstances that Grell's putting him in. Because what are you going to say your name is? What are you going to say your occupation is? Hero? Yeah.
Right.
But he's pointing more to, like, you can't say you're Green Arrow in court. That's not
right.
That's
kind of pointing out that to really be a vigilante, you do have to do your own killing. You can't go to court. And so constantly Spider-Man and all these other people are just like leaving bad guys tied up for the police to come get. But where's the evidence?
Spider-Man's been in court in multiple issues, though, so the Marvel universe functions a little differently.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. In general, superheroes, it's not. This is more undermining of the superhero cliches. So it's very clever, but it's just also very unsatisfying that he, the hero, can't touch this one guy. And he seems... It's hard to know what he feels about that $200,000, but I guess he's okay with it. And I guess he's not... The other thing is I was not clear. Is he not... Maybe in some previous continuity, he lost his fortune or something.
Also, this guy's pouring cocaine out of a briefcase. As long as you have the briefcase, you should be able to find trace amounts of cocaine, even with 80s forensics. So
And couldn't you use your arrow, your rope arrow, to tie him up with, and just leave him in a ravine full of cocaine, for the Rangers to find?
Yeah, that's another.
And then people will ask, well, how does this CIA agent end up in a pile of cocaine out in the outskirts of Seattle or wherever we are?
Yeah, there's some things that were meant to be more realistic, but if you apply a little more thought to, just felt, like you said, unsatisfying, because it feels like there's clearly connections here. You have to make them, and if you're going to pin anyone, you have to be able to pin this guy as well.
Right.
So it just
why not put an arrow through him?
Even like the muggers earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why not do something to him?
Yeah.
And I don't know, it would be interesting if Mike Grell does revisit that. Maybe this character shows up again, and maybe eventually Green Arrow manages to ruin other operations of his.
Right. And so with all that said, like, I see why this isn't beheld to a lot of the other classics of the era, because as a story, there are a lot of weaker points. But I also feel like there's a lot of strengths in this work, and I haven't heard actually too many people mention this.
Well, I feel like I used to hear people mention it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't in the current chat about comics. It doesn't seem to be amongst the classics, but I feel like, in the past 20 years, I've heard it come up pretty frequently and also be cited as the beginning of people who are fans of Green Arrow. This is where their fandom for Green Arrow started.
I also feel like maybe in some ways it was usurped as this like origin or kicking off or greater Green Arrow story when Green Arrow Year One came out, and maybe
did Micke Grell write that?
Did he?
I don't know. I'm asking you because I have no idea. I basically read.
No, it was Andy Diggle and Jock.
I basically read Green Arrow in those 70s comics that we talked about at the beginning, and then picked it up again in New 52, which was also the time where I started, connecting to everybody on YouTube about comics. And so I would hear people talk about Longbow Hunters and Micke Grell's run.
So you skipped all best years of Green Arrow.
And then I heard, yeah, exactly. And then I heard people complaining about how they had de-aged him and whatnot.
I will say in the Kevin Smith to Philip Hester and so on run, it was Oddfellows Thoughts Travis who put me on that run because he was saying it was his favorite, and so I bought the entire thing because I had a chance to get it for a cheap shot and read through it, and it's an excellent run, and I feel you could skip the Kevin Smith stuff for the most part. Just know that there's a few important plot points and just take them as they come up again and read through because it's great.
So which is the run after Kevin Smith that I should read?
Phil Hester.
Okay.
And yeah, there's a couple other creators on the book throughout that entire volume, but by and large, it's great. I think the Kevin Smith stuff is overrated, but it's at the front of it.
And then with the further stuff that Micke Grell wrote, he didn't draw it. I'm wondering, is this the last Micke Grell art major comic book thing? A guy who was drawing nonstop since the early 70s. Maybe 1987 was the last time he did a lot of drawing. I don't know.
I gotta be right back, sir.
So anyway, I think we're about done, but now we'll have kind of a point where I have to edit out this. And did you have some final thoughts, or you pretty much stated them already? I don't know.
Yeah, I think we went through most of it. It's a really interesting comic. I think it's worth checking out. And I don't know, it's just there's a few points that are a little shocking even today.
Yeah. And it's for me with the politics, it's a reminder of you can have a mix of different politics. There's aspects of this that could be interpreted as what we would currently call conservative view on crime, and a very anti the actions of the Republican administration at the time by the same token, and a bit of a commentary about the what's the proper name for it during World War II, where they put all the American Japanese into camps and the treatment they may have received.
Yes.
In the name of the government.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'm glad that you got me to read this, because it probably would have been one of those things that, there's just so much to read. I probably just would never have gotten around to it.
Oh, wow.
But now, and I found, other than this, I had to buy this digitally, but by this, I mean the Longbow Hunters. But other than that, I was able to get all the other Micke Grell Green Arrow on Hoopla. So I'll be able to read all that digitally for free.
Which is weird, because this is connected, so I don't know why.
Yeah. It's hard to understand when you look at these library services what things they include and what they don't. And I'm sure it's all decided on by the DC or whoever. Let's give Hoopla this amount of stuff and then hold back some other stuff that maybe people will buy.
Yeah.
So maybe they have hopes of selling more Longbow Hunter trades, or maybe just selling it on Comixology as they did to me.
Right. It hasn't. The trade hasn't been in print for a while, so.
Yeah, it's odd. But anyway, we will no doubt be back.
Yeah.
From the dead.
Ooh, for Halloween.
For Halloween, yes. Yeah. We may have to drink some blood, or I don't know, dodge some silver bullets, but we'll be back. This is being recorded October 1st, so I guess everyone now has Halloween on their mind.
There you go.
Okay. Do you feel like doing an unboxing, or do you want to get to bed or go help out the family?
I can do an unboxing. I'm just thinking I need a knife.
Okay.
So
I'm going to lightly edit the video and then post it. So this will be a bonus for the video viewers.
All right.
Such as it is. Or a bonus for me anyway, because I enjoy unboxing.
Let's hear. First, I have my Battle Alita Volume 2.
How was Volume 1? Have you read it yet?
It's okay.
What is Battle Alito about?
It's about this robot that was found in a dumpster by this Professor Light-esque character who's obsessed with beauty, but Alita wants to fight for her community that she's barely a part of at the start of it.
She's a female robot.
Yeah, and so she gets tacked onto this body that's more about fighting. So it's like her face is this pretty girl, and then she's a fighter. It's very, it's not very well written, honestly. I am hoping it gets a bit better, but it's this classic. Like, there's some cool stuff, but the actual dialogue isn't quite there.
Is it aimed at children or adults?
I'd say teens, I guess. I don't know. It's very manga. I don't know. It's interesting. I like it, but it's very breezy to read too, so it's easy to get caught up. So there's the wrapping.
Yeah, sometimes my in-stock trade stuff comes like that.
Usually it's in these like gray pads, so it's different.
I wish I could.
Last Ronin.
Ooh, which one? Number 3? Number 4?
4.
And do you know how many issues it's supposed to be?
6.
And every issue's oversized $10 thingamabob.
It's only $9.
Oh, cheap at any price.
And then the rest is
packed tightly.
Like this. So.
Have you been happy with Last Ronin so far?
I like it. It's interesting. I think the fact that it's been like the biggest thing in the comic book world for the past while is fascinating, because I don't think it's.
Yeah. I see a lot of people picking it up who say they don't normally get turtles. So there's some kind of hype around it that made everyone decide to give it a try.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, because the first issue was the top seller of the month, but that was by dollar, and it's a $10 issue,
right.
So there's some skew there.
Yeah.
But I like it, but I don't think it's the greatest thing. I don't understand why it's this mass appeal point.
So for you, it isn't as exciting as just the ongoing Turtles book, but with the 100+ issues now.
I think it's better than the current ongoing issues, but I think they've taken a dive recently.
Is that because of the new writer?
Yes. And I know a lot of people that wouldn't like that, but that's how I feel. Oh, I guess I get some nonsense.
Promotional materials.
Yeah. Well, that's weird. I got this Garth Ennis book.
I read the first issue and then dropped it. Marjorie Finnegan.
Radiant Black?
I
don't think you've been reading that.
No, I don't read it, and I don't hear people I hear people kind of liking it, but not excited about it, if that makes sense.
There's a couple issues back that I really like that issue that sucked me back in for a while, but then it kind of rolled back down again. So I'm going to give it a few more, and if it doesn't pick up, I might see where we're at. Still liking Once and Future.
Yeah.
That
Are
feels
you
like
able
the
to
it book.
follow everything?
So far I feel like I have a decent grasp, but I probably need to do a reread.
I mean, with that issue in particular, but in the last few issues, I felt like, oh my God, I really need to reread everything to understand this.
Yeah, it's getting to about that point where I feel that about any book that isn't whatever.
Kieran Gillen is not a writer who makes things easy on me. Symbiote Spider-Man is back. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Fighting dinosaurs.
I read the first few minis of that and enjoyed it, but not quite enough in the end to just keep buying it and buying it and buying it.
That's fair. It's not the top of my pile. Most of these are X books, frankly. So.
X Corp. Who's writing X Corp?
Who is writing it? Howard. Someone Howard.
Teeny Howard. Or Tiny Howard.
Tiny Howard. There you go. I like X Corp more than most of the rest. It has a feel of that like third gen Mike Carey Wildcats.
Oh. I didn't know Mike Carey wrote Wildcats.
Yeah, I think he had one of the longer runs. It's Wildcats is a weird book that people forget after Jim Lee, and Jim Lee had all the worst stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I ever read it at all. I just looked at some of the Jim Lee art.
I know you're not getting X-Men Legends 7.
Is that by Chris Claremont or something?
This is by Hama.
Oh, Larry Hama.
Because this is taking place during the Wolverine run that I'm in the middle of reading now, actually. So there's
I like
Peter
Larry
David
Hama. I like Larry Hama usually.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's still good, but I have good memories of him.
I'll do a video on his run eventually. I'm still chewing through it.
The Wolverine run or this X-Men Legends?
Of Wolverine from back in the day, 80s, 90s. Onslaught, because I know you loved Onslaught back when.
I never read the Onslaught era.
Fantastic Four.
Are you enjoying that? Because I read the anniversary issue and enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've thought about dropping Fantastic Four every now and again. It's just a harder book for me to put down. It's only an issue a month, and I like it. I like Slott. I don't know. One of my last issues of Nightwing.
You've lost interest in Nightwing.
Once I saw they were doing this,
Fear State.
I stopped buying.
Yes, I see Fear State come along. I'm glad that at the moment I'm not buying DC Comics.
Yeah. X-Men proper.
You hold that up a little higher. I'm trying to see the cover. That's a hard to parse out cover, at least on video here.
Yeah.
Is that Jerry Duggan now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Who I consider a good writer.
It is
other things I've read.
The transfer to the new era ruffled a lot of people's feathers, rightfully so, I think, but I'm curious to see where the issues go after.
He's probably much more of a meat and potatoes writer than Jonathan Hickman.
Yeah, he is. But he also does a lot of fun stuff with character that I don't think Hickman's capable of doing. So, Moon Knight.
A lot of people loving that. I read the first issue and I couldn't get into it.
That's fair.
But I think it might be, I don't know.
Yeah. This is terrible.
Is that Nonstop Spider or Web of Spider?
Web of. I don't think Nonstop.
And who's the writer of that?
Shinnick.
Never heard of him or her.
I don't know. I've already bought the last issue, but I don't like that run. There's this. Did you read this?
I've read that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so in my opinion.
That's fair. I don't think it's living up to the promise of a Spider-Man life story.
But... Right. Or living up to the average work by that writer, Mark Russell.
Oh.
Who I don't think you're so familiar with, but I think it's one of his lesser outputs. What does that say? Marauders.
Marauders, yeah. With Kitty having different hair. Or Kate.
Who's in Marauders besides Kitty?
Well, Emma and...
Is that guy who runs the
Hellfire Club? Club. Spacing on his name. But like Pyro's in here normally. Storm has been a character, though I think she exited the book. They just made a big deal of that. Those tend to be the main ones. I know there's a couple other characters kind of there. Iceman's been a character, but I don't know. I like the book overall. I think it's one of the better X books, but I'll know a lot of people disagree. One of my last issues of Iron Man.
Can you hold that cover up a little higher? I want to see the whole thing. It's got that must be an Alex Ross cover.
Mm-hmm. I really liked the first arc, and then they went to space, and it dropped off for me.
Yeah, I'd been hearing some good things about Iron Man with that writer Cantwell, who I know from Dark Horse Comics, but he did some interesting creator-owned work. I was surprised that he was at Marvel at all, because his work wasn't at all like superhero stuff.
More X-Men.
What's Magneto on trial for now?
Killing his daughter.
Oh.
Supposedly.
She'll be back.
Well, not necessarily. That's kind of the point.
Is his daughter Polaris, or we're talking someone else?
Scarlet Witch.
Oh. Huh. Okay. Well, they have to bring her back now that she's a TV star.
Yeah.
I really like that 60th anniversary story. And I really like the John Romita Jr. art, which I haven't been saying in a while, but he seemed to do a good job, I thought.
I like JRJR, so I'm hoping that if he's doing it right, they'll keep me on the book.
I thought I would never like him again after reading his Superman Year One with Frank Miller.
It's about his worst work ever.
Deadly Class. I didn't even know that was still going.
It's been printed fairly sporadically
throughout
the pandemic, so that's understandable. I can't follow it anymore. I read the issues, but I don't know what's going on. I need to reread this someday. I'm mostly just collecting the issues because I'm this deep in, and I don't want to give it up.
Well, if it's still the same artist, it's amazing art anyway.
Mm-hmm. Oh, here we go.
Green Lantern.
Yeah.
Annual, huh? I have not. I collected the Grant Morrison Green Lantern, the second season or whatever, and I haven't read any of it yet. And so I stopped buying Green Lantern because I hadn't read the old Green Lantern.
I've been enjoying this run. It's really trying to play off more the Green Lantern mythos. It's not doing the whole emotional ring spectrum in full yet, but it's played with a lot of the more B tier characters, I guess, and bumping them against each other. And
so it's not all Hal Jordan all the time.
Yeah, I think he's gone. It's, I don't know, it's a fun book. I don't think it's a great book. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to anyone, but it's been it's a fun DC. It's the only DC book I'm really sticking with. Yeah, Deadpool.
Have you been reading him all along? Red, White, and Blood, which probably means it costs more than $3.99 then.
Yes. But this has been a weird trend that I'm hoping dies off soon, but I was happy to see Deadpool got it since there's no ongoing Deadpool right now.
Are they doing Elektra that way? I might like to check that out.
I haven't seen an Elektra one.
Or maybe I'm confusing it with something else.
I've seen Wolverine, Carnage, Superman, Harley Quinn, and Deadpool.
And
I think there's a
Red
whole
Sonja over at Dynamite. They're doing
okay.
Red Sonja.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Also black and white and red, or red, white, and black, or whatever. Because she's red, Sonya. Get it?
Excalibur.
Led by Dr. Doom?
Yeah. The way it should be, right?
I guess.
X-Force.
Does this have anything to do with X-Force in the past?
It's an X-Men book.
Okay. God, so many X-Men.
Well, because there's the initial X-Force, which is like Cable, Cannonball, Feral, and all them. And by the time you get to the third volume, or like Uncanny X-Force, it's not that at all anyways. And so X-Force has had kind of different meanings throughout the year anyways, and Wolverine became like the big X-Force character after a while. Because, Wolverine needed another book.
Right. He always needs more books.
So
actually, they don't overplay Wolverine as much as they did.
Give it a month.
8 or 9
He has 2 events coming up.
Because I remember when I first, I came back in a big way to comics in the New 52, and then I started buying a lot of Marvel. And at that point, in 2012, there were just half of Marvel comics seemed like Wolverine books. But I guess these things cycle in and out. Still got more?
Yeah. We're about halfway through.
Wow.
Let's see. Green Lantern proper.
Oh, that's one of those Virgin covers almost.
Yeah, which is weird because I try to always order cover A, so I guess I missed this time. More. Yeah. Oh well, not a big deal. My only issue of Amazing this month, which is annoying, because this
annoying that there's only one, or that it's still Nick Spencer.
Yes.
To both.
Well, because I just heard all the buzz about his last issue, and I really want it so I can end this pain and then move on to the next thing. I'm so excited for that to end.
But you will read it.
I've bought and read every other issue. I'm not going to stop now. I don't know why I did it, but I mean, I already paid for it, right? There's no way I'm stopping now, and I'm so excited for the new run. I've heard apprehension about it because it's Ben Reilly, and it's this weird new idea, but I'm like, you know what? Spider-Man, new idea. Peter Parker needs a sleep right now. Let's do something fun. I don't care. Just anything else. And the creators I wanted to see on Spider-Man, like of the known quantities that I would pick, are all part of this weird new rehash of Brand New Day. So it's like a weekly book,
right, with
3 times
a team of 3 or 4 writers. One of the writers being Patrick Gleason, which I thought was an interesting touch.
Which is awesome.
Because
Kelly Thompson.
I mean, he's a great artist, and I've only read him writing one comic, but he did a very good job with it. He wrote a Robin miniseries, Damian Robin.
Yes. And I remember that, and I liked it. I didn't love it as much as him doing art when they were doing
when Tomasi was the writer.
Yeah, when they were doing what was that book? Just Batman and Robin.
Batman and Robin. And then they did Superman together, or Action, one or the other. And he was kind of a co-plotter at that point.
Yeah.
Another Web of Spider-Man.
Yeah. One more issue after that, and it's done. I was trying Static. It didn't particularly grab me. You didn't try that at all, did you?
No.
Did you look at any of the milestone stuff?
No. Because I glanced at the art, and it just turned me off whatever I looked at. And I thought, well, I can go back and read the old milestone.
Fair enough.
But basically, I'm buying almost no DC. Like DC has to do something really specific to win me over.
I dropped Static. I dropped Nightwing. I dropped Robin. I think Green Lantern's the only one I'm going to be getting regularly, and I'd like to maybe pick up a second, but I'm going to give it a few months. I think, see if they do something new.
I think I'm trying to think what DC
Checkmate.
I get. I think the only thing I get, whoops, I'm not in the picture, is maybe Mr. Miracle.
Oh, how's that been treating you?
I've been liking it. It was a bit of a shock at first. It took a while to realize it's not taking place in the regular DC universe.
Oh, okay.
So this is Shiloh Norman, who was the apprentice to Mr. Miracle and was supposed to be the next Mr. Miracle. But in the universe he's in, he's never even heard of Scott Free.
Okay, that's fun.
Oh, and the other one I'm getting is Tom King's Supergirl.
I've heard good things.
Those are the only DCs I'm getting, I
think. I saw Chaos and Comics talk about this earlier. The Demon Days.
So I haven't seen his video on it yet. What? Oh, it's Peach Momoko. Okay, I've heard of those. So each one's a number one, but they're all Demon Days. How clever of them.
If I could change anything, just remove the numbers and just have the subtitles, or just have it be a mini series, because there's a story that carries through.
Yeah, that's not good for the casual reader. Won't be able to know where to read next.
Yeah. Still getting this. I don't necessarily know why.
New Mutants.
Yep.
Because it's an X book.
It is.
That cover looks pretty good.
The covers are good.
But covers don't mean much if the story's not good.
Yeah, the internal art doesn't do a lot for me, and
make you big again.
I just
boy, there's backgrounds are just fuzz or something.
Yeah, it's one of my least favorite, or it's consistently about my least favorite X book, especially now that the Children of the Atom mini is done. Hellions. Fun.
Which is an X book, right?
Yes.
I don't even know what Hellions is at all.
Hellions was the group that Emma was leading back in like the Claremont days that all got killed the second he left, basically.
So are they related to the Hellfire Club? Is that why they're Hellions?
I think that was the plan, the name, but they were supposed to be a rival group to Xavier's students. So it was another group of students, but they were learning and doing things differently. There was another group of Hellions later when they had new X-Men replace the idea of New Mutants, and there was a group of Hellions within Xavier's school, but I don't think this is playing off that at all. The most confusing aspect... No, that's New Mutants. Never mind. I don't know. The Hellions, though, in this run is a bunch of the less desirable mutants on Krakoa banding together to do like what work operations, and because they all can die, and when they die they lose moments of their memory that's being used against them by Sinister, so that they don't remember the details of what they're doing for him, so that he can keep manipulating them to carry through, to keep doing this what work stuff for them against the island that they're not fully aware of.
So they're kind of like the Suicide Squad or something.
Except actually dying regularly.
But coming back to life, but with their memories erased.
Yes.
That's actually a really cool setup.
Yeah. And this is the fun Sinister that's, I think, was informed by Matt Fraction, I think, where they made him a more fun character, not just a...
I wouldn't know.
Maniacal, yeah. Oh, I guess Sinister War is technically another Spider-Man issue.
Sinister War is a Spider-Man thing? I hadn't heard of it.
So they decided Nick Spencer has to go quickly. And so he had this whole plan that was supposed to be 100 issues, but they're making it closer to 75 issues. And to fill the gaps or whatever, the last couple of arcs, there's been either the Sinister War mini or a series of one-shots throughout the Chameleon story, so that there's Amazing, and then there's like another art team doing this other stuff as Nick Spencer like shotgunned his story forward.
That's kind of like Tom King on Batman. It seems like a very bad idea to decide we're going to give someone 100-issue run. It just doesn't, on multiple levels, seem like a good idea.
Well, especially from the onset before you know how people are going to receive it or if there's any
Right.
legs for it.
Right.
Yeah. This is a facsimile of the first Miles Morales appearance.
Ultimate Fallout. I didn't know he appeared in something separate, not from Spider-Man.
Well, this was near the end of the Ultimate Universe, and this is supposed to be a big deal because this is happening concurrently with Peter dying.
Right.
But before Miles gets his initial book, he appears in this, which is part of this event, and so it's a collector's item. And what's
And you
funny
hadn't
about
read it
this
before.
facsimile is that it's actually closer to the original book in printing. Like, I've seen comparisons side by side. It's really hard to tell unless you know the details to look for from the original issue.
Well, it's a facsimile, so.
Well, yeah, but the other facsimiles have like something on the cover that it's very easy to tell.
Oh, so you might go in the store and think you found a copy of the original if you don't look closely.
And I mean, the price would be hugely different, but
yeah. But you might think the store just didn't realize. You know, people are always hoping for that key issue that the store doesn't know is a key issue.
Yep. And then Turtles.
So they're doing concurrently the main Turtles book.
Well, I mean, Eastman has a hand in everything, but this is really Campbell and her backup art team pulling out this book, and so really the talent on this book is not the talent on Last Ronin,
right? And so Campbell has not proved to be as good a writer as the previous set of writers, Tom Waltz and someone else.
Oh, I mean, Waltz and Eastman being the principal, and then other people filling in like the B books generally or whatnot. Though Campbell was a great artist,
right?
And sometimes like plotter on some of the earlier stuff, and was great there. But her overall take of Turtles is a little webcomic-y, I think, in a way that I don't appreciate as much. It's not, and here's the thing, it's a very different comic. It's not a bad comic. I think it's fun. I still think it's very much worth picking up, but it's not hitting the highs for me.
Right.
In the same way. So,
well,
I don't know.
It's amazing that the Turtles hit the highs for so long. But anyway, it's always sad when you see the comic coming into a new phase that's not as thrilling. So is that the end of the haul, or is there more?
That's the haul.
Woohoo!
That's a month of comics, and then I'm hoping for next month sooner, but I know it's not going to happen. That's the hard part of doing
for
this.
That Spencer book while everyone else is talking about it.
Yeah.
But you must be saving a lot of money.
Yeah. The reason I'm picking up as many as I am, including all the X books, is because I'm getting it at 40-ish% off. And so it made it a lot more affordable again, as opposed to not.
Right. I mean, 40%, that's very significant. So that's almost $2 off each comic.
And I only do it once a month to save as much as I can on shipping.
Right.
So, because if I did it even like twice a month, it eats in pretty significantly.
Eats into your percentage. Yeah. Yeah. I remember once because, Travis Oddfellow Thoughts always was doing his DCBS, and I went on DCBS and calculated what it would all cost me, and with the postage as a weekly, the way Travis did it, with the number of comics I was getting at the time, it would have ended up being a 28% discount, which is better than the 25% discount I get at my comic book store.
But not
however, by doing it at my comic book store, I get 25% off everything. So I can just browse around and, at the last minute, buy any comic or any back issue or, comic book supplies for that. So it just seemed, but if I do, like you're doing, just once a month, then the percentage would be very high.
Right. And I've found now that I've been doing this a little over a year now, like being a little patient hasn't been too hard. The book that I consistently find it difficult for is Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I don't care as much.
Right. And is that because you're watching other people talk about Spider-Man?
Yeah, it seems to be like the hottest book regularly, and I just half the fun for me with Spider-Man is kind of being in it with people as opposed to just kind of enjoying it whenever.
Right. Well, I'm going to say good night to our YouTube audience. If anyone hung out for the whole video, you got to see what Matt is up to. But we'll probably be back. If we do the plan I'm suggesting, we'll probably be back more often.
Well, I'm excited to hear what that is.
Although we talked about it a little bit before.
Yeah.
But I'll end the broadcast and we will talk a little bit more.
Okay.